Hi everyone, my name is Pastor Sarah Stobie and I serve here with all the saints at Bayshore Lutheran Church in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. And you have found our Biblical Lit vlog, where we here at Bayshore are reading the entire Bible in the year 2022. There's a reading guide on our website. You can find it very easily there. We also have a couple copies here in the building if you live or work nearby. So, as my community knows, this has been a very stressful couple months here, and so I have been behind in my reading personally and also making vlogs. And I announced this past Sunday, on All Saints Sunday, that we had finally reached the New Testament. And since we reached the New Testament, I decided to catch us up with our reading guideline and try to make this a little easier, especially for those of you who may not have been reading with me at all. And that's okay, because now we've entered into the New Testament and it's going to be a lot more familiar to you. And maybe starting at the New Testament for some of you is a better way in to reading your Bible in a organized and a more frequent manner. So we are at basically weeks 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45. I know, I'm a little behind. With this week being November 9th today as I record this. So what I've decided to do, weeks 41 through 45 are basically the four Gospels. And so what I'm doing today is I'm combining all of these weeks together, and I'm going to create 4 segments in this rather long vlog. I know, if you saw how long it is, I apologize. But what we're going to allow you to do through some magic and mystery that only my daughter, the editor, knows how to do, is we're going to break this vlog into 4 parts. So you can immediately stay with me as we begin our Matthew, and then you can pause or you can come back and immediately forward to Mark and forward to Luke and forward to John. But reading the Gospels, it's familiar to most of you and it's an easy read. It really is. And there's a lot of repetition. We'll talk about that. So what I'm going to do is I have picked 4 stories, 1 in each Gospel, that I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts and insight. Obviously, I cannot cover the entire Gospel in a short vlog anyway, but in this case, you'll get a taste of something for each Gospel, and hopefully it'll inspire you to do some reading of your own. So here we are. I am looking now at the Gospel of Mark. And so, no, that's not true, Lucy Jane. You'll have to edit this out. You'll have to go back, and where I said the Gospel of Mark, you have to edit that. And you're going to have to start here. So here we are, beginning with the Gospel of Matthew. All right, so if you have your Bible with you or not, it's completely up to you. But we're going to start with the Gospel of Matthew, and we're going to go to chapter 15. So go ahead and turn with me to chapter 15 if you can. Don't worry, I will also read what I'm going to cover as well. Now, Matthew is written to a specific audience. Matthew is written to the Jewish people who believe and also the Gentile people who believe. And to be honest with you, Matthew has a very anti-Semitic feel to it. Our modern ears hear it probably with more sensitivity, which I'm really grateful for. And sometimes as you're reading through the Gospel of Matthew, you can just really feel it. Please remember when this was written and that it was written to specific audiences. And this Gospel really was written to those Jewish believers of Jesus and also Gentile believers. And Matthew does have a taint. It does have a lens, if you will, about Jesus and Jesus's purpose. Each Gospel actually does. So we'll get to that. But as you're reading along, you're going to get to chapter 15, and we're going to start chapter 15, verse 10. And I'm going to just read it. So, then Jesus called the crowd to him and said to them, Listen and understand. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but it is what comes out of the mouth that defiles. Then the disciples approached and said to him, Do you know that the Pharisees took offense when they heard what you said? Jesus answered, Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if one blind person guides another, both will fall into a pit. But Peter said to Jesus, Explain this parable to us. Then he said, Are you still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth enters the stomach and goes out into the sewer? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this is what defiles. For out of the heart come evil intentions, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person. But to eat with one unwashed hands does not defile. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, the Pharisees taught about, and not just the Pharisees, I mean, all of the religious leaders and scribes at the local synagogue and in the temples were teaching the Jewish people the law of Moses. And the law of Moses included rules about food preparation. And you might even know about this called through kosher, the kosher laws. And part of those laws included hand washing. And so a person was to cleanse their hands before eating food, because if they did not cleanse their hands in a proper way, and there's a prayer for that, then what they touched would actually become defiled, and they would then put it into their mouth, and then they were told that their whole body was defiled. Okay. Now, we don't live this way, right, as Christians, and the reason why we don't is basically because of Matthew and these verses. Jesus is very clear that this stringent following of the law regarding ritual and regarding the ritual cleansing and things like that is not necessary if a person's behavior is actually poor. And so for Jesus is more concerned with a person's behavior, what a person does, what a person says. So here in this story, Jesus is saying, it's not what goes into your mouth. It's not the food, the kosher, non-food. It's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you. He seems to be saying here then that their kosher rules are no longer important. And he seems to be indicating here that, I know most of you know that the animal pig is not kosher and therefore cannot be eaten. And Jesus seems to say here, it doesn't matter if you eat a piece of pork or ham. Actually, what matters is what's coming out of your mouth. And he uses some pretty good description here about how we eat things and how what we eat passes through our body eventually. You can kind of go there. But he's saying, but what comes out of our mouths is from our heart, and it shows who we are as a person. So a person who does not eat kosher in Jesus's mind, but yet speaks in love and has words of action and love, is actually closer to what God intends than a person who is so strict with what they eat and how they prepare their hands before eating, that is ritual, but it's not showing a person's true heart and what they truly feel. So I like this story because I think that we all have a lot of ritual that we do. And we all have a lot of traditions that we carry. Some we carry because we want to. Some we don't carry because we want to, but we feel that we have to. Some of us do some of these rituals and traditions, because we feel forced to do so. And what Jesus is basically saying is what is in your heart. Oh, I forgot the person who doesn't do the ritual at all. And therefore people are mad at that person because that person doesn't uphold the ritual. Now, before I go a little bit farther, I mean, you can define ritual as you want to. It could be a family tradition. It could be, a family expectation. It could be a work expectation, whatever it may be that everyone's doing because they think that they need to do it in order to make them look good. But yet it's what comes out of the heart that matters the most. A good example, or maybe a poor one, depending on how you think of it, of a very wealthy person donating to a charity, but then with their very mouths will slander the very people that the charity is helping. How's that? You probably can come up with a better one. So why this is so important, especially in the Gospel of Matthew, is Jesus is basically changing how the Jewish believers feel that they need to carry on the Jewish faith as they believe that Jesus is Messiah. And this is a huge, huge issue. They've been raised Jewish, they have Jewish traditions, Jewish laws, and suddenly Jesus is upsetting the apple cart, if you will, for lack of better idiom. And there was a lot of tension with that. And in Matthew, Jesus is killed for that. Jesus is killed because he upset the apple cart too much. He preached that a lot of the things that the Jewish people believed were critical for following God were not as important as doing other things. And so for me, if I had to choose just one story today to kind of tell you about Matthew's purpose, it's this: teaching the Jewish people that it's not about all the laws, and it's not about all of the things that they've been keeping up. Some with joy and some with fear. Joy because maybe they did enjoy doing them, but some of them doing it because they felt it was something they had to. And if they didn't do it, that they might not be in God's favor. So that is my story for the Gospel of Matthew. And I hope that you are able to read through the Gospel of Matthew. And if you have any comments or questions about it, please let me know. It's a gospel that we do study every couple years. And guess what? Matthew is the gospel that we will begin this December, January as our year-long focus here at the church. So, okay, segment number 2. Segment number 2 is the Gospel of Mark. Now, as you're reading the Gospel of Mark, I am certain that you are getting into the repetition, right? You are noticing as you're reading through Matthew, and then you get to Mark, you're like, wow, Pastor, this sounds really familiar. Yes, it does. And the reason why it sounds familiar is because Mark was written first. Now, I know Mark is not first in our lineup of the Gospels, but Mark as a gospel is the one that we have the most earliest record for. So Mark was written first. Mark was circulated first, if you will. And the Gospels, Matthew and Luke, had Mark as a basis. And so they were able to take Mark as their foundation, their basis, and they were either able to expound on the story or they were able to add to the story with another story like Luke does a few times. So you're going to get a lot of repetition. You are going to get a lot of repetition. This story that I'm going to tell you in Mark came first, which Matthew changes slightly. Again, remember Matthew's intent. Mark's intent is a little different. So go with me to Mark chapter 7. Okay. And excuse me while I take a little sip here of water. Thank you. So in the Gospel of Mark, Mark Mark is writing to Jewish people as well, Jewish believers as well. But Mark's intent is not as much as Matthew is, where Matthew does feel anti-Semitic today in our current culture. We're more sensitive to that, which is good. Mark not so much, but Mark is also very simple. And so Mark doesn't dive into really anything. Mark just simply tells the story. It's very simple Greek. Mark is the gospel that most seminarians begin translating when they're in seminary because it's a simpler Greek, more simple. It's just pretty plain. So the stories themselves are pretty plain. So in Mark 7, verse 24, just follow along with me as I read. From there, Jesus sent out and went away to the region of Tyre. Now that's north in the map. Jesus entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice, but a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Jesus said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then Jesus said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Oh, there's a lot to unpack here. So Jesus is not in Galilee. So Mark is really specific here. Mark is specific, saying he is north. So he is north in the region of Tyre. If you look in your biblical map, I'm sure you can find it. It was not among the hills of Galilee. And he doesn't want anyone to know that he's there. I always think it's interesting, if you look at where Tyre is at, it's on the Mediterranean Sea. And so I just like to think of it that Jesus escapes to go on vacation. I know I'm being flippant, but seriously, everybody likes to get away once in a while, and obviously Jesus wanted to. Now, this is a region, though, that is not Jewish. It is not Jewish, and this is a region that was occupied by Syria and Phoenicia. And you might remember the Phoenicians not being friends with the Jewish people, correct? And so here Jesus is. He's not in Jewish area. He's in a Gentile place. And you could say that he is among the enemy. You could. And I think Mark's hinting to that, because Mark says that not only was this woman a Gentile, meaning a non-Jew, but that she was Syro-Phoenician in origin. Now this goes over our ears and we think, oh, whatever. But seriously, this is, and I've been trying to think of a good example, my friends, and I just don't know how to do this without upsetting people. But let's just say we're all Packers in the Packer country. And then you go take a trip and you go stay, let's just do it, Minnesota, Vikings. And a Viking fan comes to your hotel in Minnesota and asks for your help. And you're like, oh man, you're a Viking fan. Okay, I know, I'm being silly, but it's true. This is what we do. We're competitive and we have long memories. So this woman comes to him and she is not who Jesus is preaching to right now. And she begs Jesus, cast the demon out of her daughter. I'm not going to get into the whole demon thing right now. If you are interested in that, I'm doing a Bible study next week, Wednesday, and I am going to be talking about spiritual beings, demons, and the devil, and ghosts. I'm not going to do that here. Let's just say that the girl has illness. She's got this demon in her, and the mother wants her to be healed, and she believes that Jesus can do it. Now, that's key number one. She wouldn't go to Jesus unless, one, she was very desperate, and two, she had just even a little bit of faith that the rumors she heard were true, that he could heal her daughter. So Jesus, though, doesn't respond to her with kindness. Maybe you wouldn't respond to kindness to a Viking fan either. I'm just saying. Jesus says, though, and it's really harsh, let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. But she answered, Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. First of all, the bravery of this woman. But I also think it's because she's desperate. The bravery of her to say to Jesus, okay, fine, but, and then she has a counterpoint, a counter argument. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But we don't like a Jesus being rude, do we? Now, Matthew has it even more rude. In Matthew, Jesus says that I came to save the lost sheep of Israel, meaning you're not it. And her reply is basically the same about the crumbs from the table falling down. And then him saying, your faith has made you well. Mark was written first. Mark doesn't say the children of Israel. Mark doesn't say sheep of Israel. He just simply says the children be fed first. And I think you can infer from that it does mean the children of Israel. But it is a subtle difference, isn't it? It is a subtle difference than Matthew. Anyway, her counterpoint, though, sets up what is to happen. Jesus comes and preaches first to the Jewish people. He preaches first to the Galileans. He preaches to the Judeans. He's in the temple in Jerusalem. His message is for the Jewish people to recognize who he is based on their faith. The Jewish people have been waiting for Messiah, and Jesus is like, I am. I'm the Messiah. I'm the Christ. And I'm the Son of God. Okay? But here we have this turn in Mark 7 already hinting to that Jesus's words are being heard by other people, and Jesus's teachings are being heard by non-Jewish people, and they are responding to Jesus. They are actually hearing Jesus, maybe like this Syrophoenician woman. They are hearing about the wonders and the miracles and the things that he's teaching. They might not get all of the nuances because they don't know the Jewish laws and the Jewish stories as much, but the heart of the gospel, the good news, they are hearing. So, why did I choose this story for Mark? Because, my friends, we are surrounded today by Syrophoenician people. And what I mean by that is we are surrounded by people who did not grow up in a faith with God. We are surrounded now in our neighborhoods, our communities, our workplaces, the schools and things with people who do not have any foundation at all in the Christian faith. And it would be really easy for the church to only focus on the Christians that are currently out there. Those who attend church, and maybe those who attended church as a child and then somehow along life's path just stopped attending. It would be really easy for the church to say, let's focus on the ones who left rather than focus on any around us who have no understanding at all. That's just too much work to try to explain all of Christianity and all of Judaism, the historical context of the Old Testament. It's just too much work. We're going to focus on those who at least have had experience in church, and we're going to try to bring them back, if you will. And I don't like that phrase anyway. But here, The Syrophoenician woman very clearly with Jesus makes it clear that she has been observing. She might not know the 10 commandments. She might not know anything about kosher law. She might not even have ever set foot in Jerusalem or seen the temple. She might think that mikvah, the ritual cleansing, she's heard about it. She might think that that's just absolutely ridiculous. But she is still observing. She's observing and she is watching those who believe in Jesus, what they do and what they say. And she has heard stories about Jesus, and they have affected her enough that in her time of desperation, she turns to him to help her daughter. So for me, that makes me think about the church and how the church today needs to think about how we are being observed and how non-people, that's not what I mean. How people without a Christian faith or Christian faith background are observing the church and how the church is living out its mission. Now, unfortunately, that can be very negative, because if all they're doing is observing the church through the media, chances are when the church is in the media now, it's not a positive, or at least not as much positive as it could be. I mean, sure, there's goodwill stories and Good Samaritan stories out there, but for the most part, they are observing negative things. So for us today, those of us who belong to a church and those of us who love our church, I think that this story reminds us that we are always being observed. And is the church a place where if someone observes us enough in our personal life, in our work life, wherever that may be, is the church, which is being observed, is the church presenting itself in a good and favorable light, in a light that has hope in it, so that a person who is desperate enough for help would actually turn to the church, even with no faith, and come in order to be healed. I know that's really deep, but that is my concern. I don't know if the church, capital C and little c, is doing what it needs to do today so that those who observe us, like the Syrophoenician woman, would feel that, yes, in my time of desperation, the church that my friend goes to, or the church that my neighbor goes to, or the church that is on the corner, I could go there. I could go there and be healed, or be helped at least. So that is something heavy to think about. Yeah. Whew, okay. Moving on. This segment is the Gospel of Luke. All right, so the Gospel of Luke, that is my favorite gospel. We just did the Gospel of Luke this whole year, since last December, and I love my Lucan year in the lectionary. I'm going to miss my Lucan year. We had Matthew before that, Luke, and then the next gospel is Mark. Oh, you know what? I think in the last segment I said it was going to be Matthew, but it's not. It's Mark, because it goes in order. So it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Oh, no. Sarah, you've been doing this too long today. It is going to be Matthew next, because I'm starting already my homily for Christmas. Anyway, I hope you're doing well. So again, let's restart. The Gospel of Luke. All right, so the Gospel of Luke is my favorite, and the Gospel of Luke as I said, was influenced heavily from the Gospel of Mark. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels because they are all interconnected. You've got Mark kind of like at the base here as the center, and then it branches off. The stories of Mark branches off both into the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew. And I could spend hours on the Gospel of Luke, but I know I can't. I know I can't. So here we go. What I would love for you to do with me is turn to Luke chapter 15, verse 8. So Luke chapter 15, verse 8, and while you do that, I'm going to have a sip of water. Okay. This story is not as nearly as heavy as our previous one from the Gospel of Mark. This one's a little bit more lighthearted. I just love Luke because Luke has humor. Luke has a lot of depth, which I enjoy. And Luke has a lot of women in it, and I really enjoy that. So Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, verse 8, okay? So chapter 15, verse 8. It's usually called the parable of the lost coin. I wish it was called the parable of the woman who swept her house, but I'll get there. So verse 8. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I lost." Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Oh, there's so much here to do. Okay, first of all, translators make choices based on their context and the purpose of their writing. I think that's fair to say. And here we do have a translation choice, which I don't care for. So I didn't change it as I was reading it. But in verse 9, it says, when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors. The Greek here for the word friends is feminine. Friends is gender-free, right? Her friends. It's gender-free. It could be male, female, they. Could be anything, right? But in Greek, she calls together her sisters. And I do think it's her sisters and friends, kind of a combined thought here of her close friends, her BFFs, her sisters, her friends, And so I think that this translation choice said, yeah, it's her friends, it's her friends. But I like the fact that it is a feminine word. So anyway, maybe that's just me. But this woman it's a parable, and Jesus has portraying this woman to have 10 silver coins. First of all, that is just a lot of money. My Bible tells me that 10 silver coins at this time was a full day's wage. So it's a lot of money. And she has these 10 silver coins, and Jesus is saying, what woman having a whole day's wage, 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And then when she finds it, she invites people over to rejoice with her because she's found the coin. Oh, there's so much to unpack here. First, this is just another parable about how, Jesus and the lost sheep, when Jesus says that, what shepherd will go and find the one sheep out of 100 that is lost and then bring it back to the fold. Here, it's a woman sweeping her house because she's lost one coin. It's important to her. When she finds it, she has a party. I heard a wonderful homily on this from a female um, church leader many years ago, and she didn't say Jesus had it wrong, but she said, how did she lose the coin? Now think about this with me. She's not saying Jesus's parable's wrong, but she just kind of delved into it a little bit more, and she said, what woman or man or whatever, what person would not keep good track of their coins? Maybe she realized she didn't have them all as she was cleaning. I don't know if you've ever done that. If you've started like cleaning your car or cleaning the pantry, or you're cleaning, some part of your house, and as you're cleaning it, you realize that whatever you thought was there was not there anymore. Have you ever done that? Am I the only one? And so or you clean your desk and you're like, oh yeah, that piece of paper, it's going to be in here. And then you start cleaning the desk and you realize it's not there. So the female leader who spoke on this really beautifully, she said, what if this woman was already sweeping her home? And as she was sweeping her home, she realized what she was missing. And then she said, just work with me on this. It's a simple parable, so I don't have to tell you what it means. But in this context, just think about it with me. What if we all need to do some cleaning? Some house cleaning. And what if we all need to do some cleaning, some physical, mental, spiritual cleaning, in order for us to see or to find out what we are missing? Okay, so let me explain that a different way. What if you don't know something's missing because you haven't taken the time in that area of your life to do a deep dive of cleaning? Now, for me, as this female leader years ago was talking, I immediately went to mental health, because for the most part, people just keep going on and they don't do a deep clean to see what it is that they have and what it is that they don't have. And if you just keep letting the dust build up in your life, it covers all things, doesn't it? It covers the good, and it also covers the bad, and it covers the really traumatic too. And so for me, ever since I heard that homily about this, that's what I think of when I see this story. Is, okay, on the surface, yes, the angels are rejoicing that a person repented. Oh yes, it's a great story, and it's true. But look at this a little differently. What do we need to clean to see what's missing? And then what do we need to do, like light the lamp and get out the broom and really clean house in order to find what we are missing or uncover what has been covered over, and that actually is something that we need to explore, and we need to unpack, and we need to work on. I said this one wasn't going to be as deep as the other one, but I guess it is. But every time I read these couple verses, I think of that homily, and I think about how, that Jesus calls us to do that. And it's good for us. It's good for our mental health. It's good for our spiritual health. It's good for us physically. It's good. And how it makes us a better, healthier person. So that is my my favorite little nugget out of Luke that I rarely ever get to talk about because this doesn't come up all the time. Um, but that's how I look at that verse. And maybe when I get to heaven, Jesus is going to say that's not what I meant at all. And I'm going to say, I know, but wasn't it good though? Okay. All right, my friends. Last segment. This is the Gospel of John. Oh, so I'm not going to say that John is my least favorite. John is difficult. So as you get into John, I want you to know. I get it. I get it. John reads so differently than the other three gospels. It's not a synoptic gospel. It has its own stories. There are a few same stories that are in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, obviously, because those are key critical stories in the gospel story of Jesus anyway. But John has a whole bunch of other stories that we do not have. And John also has a lot more setup and poetry. So as you get into the Gospel of John, John 1, it begins just differently than any other gospel. And I know that these words are familiar to you. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I mean, the other three gospels do not begin that way. And this gospel focuses on John the Baptist and John's work, which was highlighted in the other gospel, but John is central here. And then from John comes Jesus. And then we have all of this stuff, all of these stories that we don't have anywhere else but the Gospel of John. Now, on one hand, this makes sense to me. John, biblical scholars do believe, was written last. So it's kind of, and I don't mean this disrespectfully in any way, but you know how sometimes an author will write a series and their first book will be this big, and then their second book will be this big, and then their third and final series will be like 3 times as long. It's because they are filling the gaps, right? They get to book 2 and they realize, oh, I forgot. Or book 2 comes out and people are writing them saying, hey, wait a minute, you dropped this theme here. Or, you never mentioned what happened to this character. Or why did this happen? You never explained it in book 2. So what do we do with that? And the author hears this and the author's like, you know what, in book 3, yeah, I need to address that. That, I think, is what happened in the Gospel of John. It's not made up. It's stories and explanations that further enhance the gospel and really explain the theology, whereas Mark is more about event, Matthew is more about the juxtaposition between Jews who believe, Gentiles who believe, and those who do not. Luke is all about the story as much as it can be, but then John is like, but why do we believe that? Why? And so John is where he gets into Jesus being the Lamb of God. So that way we make the connection of Jesus being a sacrifice for our salvation. It's stated in the other Gospels, but John spells it out. In chapter 1, John the Baptist says, there he is, the Lamb of God. It can't be more clear than that, right? So as you're reading the Gospel of John, it will be really helpful because you've just read the other 3 Gospels. But just so you know, it does a really good job sewing it all together. And the other gospel, the other writing, the book that it also sews up with, believe it or not, is the book of Revelation. So you could read after the Gospel of John, the book of Revelation, and you would see all of these ties between the two books in our New Testament. Okay, so the story I want to cover today in the Gospel of John is in chapter 8, and it's actually the last verse of chapter 7 and the first verse of chapter 8. And my Bible actually has parentheses around these saying that this might have been an added story. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that they have found Gospels of John that lacked this story. They also might have found Gospels of John where this story was written and placed in a different place in the Gospel, again, as if it was tagged on. But it was tagged on enough for the early church fathers to say, we're going to put it in to the Gospel of John, because they found enough evidence of the story to be put into the story. So, excuse me. And this is probably one of the most famous stories that we have of Jesus, that is told of Jesus. So I'm going to begin. Chapter 8. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple. Now, the Mount of Olives is literally outside the city walls of Jerusalem, so he would have come down. You still can do this. He come down the hill from the Mount of Olives and then gone into the gate of the city and then entered the temple almost immediately because of that direction of the city. So early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and Jesus sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, making her stand before all of them. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They said this to test Jesus, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, Jesus straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." Oh, this is a good one. This is a good one. So, Jesus is in the temple, and he's teaching, as John tells us was his custom whenever he was in the area. And the scribes, the Pharisees, they bring this woman who actually literally was caught in adultery. So it's not like a rumor said this woman has committed adultery. This means that like she was physically caught in the act of adultery. Now, does that mean that she was married and had an affair with another person? Does that mean that she was not married and had a relationship with another person? I mean, those details are not here, and I don't think we can adequately decide what this is. But according to Jewish law, if we want to just go to that, any woman could caught in adultery, which I would just say is inappropriate sexual behavior outside of her own marriage, was allowed to be stoned, and that is true. Now, stoned doesn't necessarily mean stoned to death, which is I'm really going to upset some people. So if there's children listening, you might not want to know, but the act of stoning did not necessarily kill somebody. It could injure them, it could maim them, it could deform them.
and it could kill them, but in this case, it was literally just being stoned. And obviously it implied death, but Moses said that these women could be stoned. And they said to Jesus, "What do you say?" Now, they do this because the law says that this is what's supposed to happen. And they know that. The Pharisees and the scribes, that's all they do is study the law. So they know what's to happen. They're trying to trip him up because if he goes against the law of Moses, then they can say that he's can be thrown out of the community. And the temple. Let's remember where he is. He's in the temple. So he's in the temple part where the Jewish men are. So if he says something that's contrary to the law of Moses, the Pharisees and the scribes can toss Jesus out of the temple and he can't be allowed to go back in. And I really do think that's what they're trying to do here. They're just trying to toss him out. And Jesus doesn't reply. Jesus bends down. He's got his finger on the ground. It's dusty. It's dirt. Who knows? Maybe he's drawing a picture. They kept on questioning him, and he doesn't say anything. He finally straightens up, and he says to them, not an answer of, yes, she should be stoned, but let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. Now, I know we're splitting hairs here, but he doesn't say don't stone her. He says that the first person to pick up the stone to throw it at her has to be without sin, which means, my friends, that there only needs to be one person, one male Jewish person, but one person who is without sin to throw that first stone. Just one. Because after that, it's implied that anyone can throw a stone, right? So Jesus is basically saying, which one of you has no sin? Because if you don't, throw the stone. Oh, this is so clever. So, okay, I'm going to get ahead of myself. Who in that group of people do you think wants to be arrogant enough to say, well, that's me? That's me. I have no sin. I can throw that first stone. Who's going to do that? Because every single person around this person is going to say, that's not true. Because none of us are sinless, none of us. So we all have people, family, friends, who know that we have sin, that we have things we struggle with, whatever that may be, physical sin, mental thought sin, verbal sin, whatever that is, okay? We all have sin. We all have sin. So Jesus is saying, is there not one person here without sin who can throw that first stone? And of course, it's a test for them. Who there is going to be the one to say, I have no sin. I have no sin. I can throw that first stone. So the picture John paints here is that one by one, beginning with the smartest people in the room, the elders, they leave first because they know I can't throw that first stone. I have sin. And so as they leave, others leave. And John paints this picture of Jesus is still bent down. He's still, writing on the ground, if you will, in the dirt. And suddenly he stands up and it's just him and the woman. And he says, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? And she said, no one, sir. And Jesus says, well, neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again. Now, the paradox here is Jesus out of all of them, right, could have thrown that first stone, but he doesn't. He doesn't. Jesus and says, go your way, and from now on, do not sin again. Of course, she will again sin somehow, but Jesus basically has tipped the scales, if you will, and shown everyone in that vicinity that day, nobody is without sin. And so, who can cast that first stone? It's really an interesting story. It's really an interesting story, and how he maneuvers the law in such a way. Now, of course, I'm sure that in past, many a man and woman were stoned for their behavior, but Jesus makes it really, really clear that from this day on, that will not happen. So it's just a beautiful story. John is filled with beautiful stories like that, and deep theology, and John is a gospel that we read every year, part and parcel, if you will. It's a hard gospel because it is so deep and theological, but I hope that you're able to get through it, and I hope that that you enjoy this gospel time, and that maybe my stories here have helped you a little bit. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for forgiving me that I got behind so much. But beginning next week, and actually part of this week, we are on track. So next week will be week 46. We'll begin the book Act of the Apostles, and that's more like a history text, and that's kind of fun too. So thank you for your patience, for your understanding, and also thank you for joining me on this journey. And I wish you all many, many blessings, and I hope to see you again really soon.